Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Michelle Wright. I'm the Chief Executive of Cause 4. For the purposes of the recording, I'm a white woman in my 40s. I've got dark brown hair and I'm wearing a grey jumper. Wonderful to see you all for this first session on transforming governance. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Absolutely fine for people to have cameras off. We're going to have a breakout though, where you'll have a chance to work together. So obviously we'd really like you to have cameras on during the breakout. If you would like to use captions, please enable them from your Zoom settings. We haven't got the chat function enabled, but we do have the Q&A function enabled. And because it's quite a big group, what we propose to do, if there are any questions or you would like any additional information on anything at all that we cover in this session, we are going to collate the questions and answers, write them up and distribute them with the slides after the session. The slide pack is quite comprehensive. It's deliberately been designed in that way so that you have something that is comprehensive to take away with you. You'll be very relieved to hear that I won't be presenting it in that way. But as I say, it's been designed on purpose to cover some of these key areas on governance. So I'm going to hand over very briefly to Holly Smith-Charles from Arts Council England, with great thanks to ACE for hosting these sessions. And she's going to say a few words about the Transforming Governance programme.
Thanks, Michelle. Yes, hello everyone. I'm not going to say much. I'm Holly Smith-Charles. I'm the Director for Creative Health and Change, and I'm the lead for the Transforming Governance programme. I'm a white woman with blonde hair that's tied back and a dark green jumper. And so I just wanted to say a very warm welcome to the Transforming Governance programme. It's a development programme that Arts Council are running over the next sort of 15, 18 months or so. And its aim is to strengthen governance in the cultural sector. So thank you for taking the time to join us today. This is our first workshop. And we'd be really keen to hear your comments and feedback, any suggestions that you might have for the future. So yeah, we'll send a feedback form out afterwards, and it'd be great to hear from you with any comments. So that's all from me. Thank you very much again, and enjoy the session.
Great, so we'll get started. So as I said, I'm Michelle Wright. I run an organisation called Cause 4. We also run the Arts Fundraising and Philanthropy programme for Arts Council England, and a programme called the Trustee Leadership Programme. So I got very involved in governance work about 12 years ago in supporting charities to be able to strengthen governance with a view to its importance in strategy and fundraising. Each of these workshops is quite short. We're going to have about 50 minutes of content, then 10-minute screen break. We'll then have 15 minutes where you'll be able to work together in groups and explore a key area that we've developed in the session. And then we'll hear from a guest speaker. So that's the format for our session today. So we're going to start with an overview of governance. We're thinking about what governance means, why it's important, what effective governance is, the key responsibilities of boards, legal, financial, and ethical, the Charity Commission requirements, because we're covering those requirements for those of us that are trustees of charities, and new regulations that we're all having to respond to, such as safeguarding. So why become a board member? It's fantastic that people take on this most responsible volunteer position, and it gives us great chance to be involved with different sorts of organisations to build networks. But we have to work within the context that actually trusteeship is not widely known about amongst the general public, and unfortunately, because there have been some very high-profile problems within charity governance, the media tends to pick up on governance in a negative way. There's a fantastic report that we'll make available after the session called Taken on Trust from the Charity Commission. And its first recommendation was that there needed to be a public awareness campaign about the importance of trustees. But unfortunately, trusteeship is often painted in a negative light. So I wanted just to start with thinking about the sector that we're working within, that we're trustees and that we're supporting, with some quick questions for you just to think about. So how many charities are there in England and Wales, do you think? How big is this sector? How many trustees are there? How many people take on this incredibly important position? What sort of level of assets do they protect? We're talking billions of pounds. A little bit on demographics. What do you think the average age is of a board member? And who can't be a trustee? What are the disqualifications? I've probably been a trustee for 20 years now, and I've only just started to be asked if I have any of the particular disqualifications. So again, these are areas that often people don't really know about. So hoping we can just explore some of those things in terms of context. So we've got 921,364 trustee positions, which are held by 700,000 individuals. So a lot of trustees hold more than one role. And we've got about 169,070 charities with a total income of 89.4 billion, according to the latest Charity Commission figures. So those organisations with an income of over £1 million account for 81% of the sector's total income, but they make up only 3% of charities. So, of course, that tells us that the majority of the organisations that we will be supporting have a turnover of under £1 million, and the majority of the charity sector is considered small. We've got very high levels of wealth held in some of our household name charities in our top 10, organisations like Cancer Research, Save the Children. In fact, Arts Council England is in the top 10 because of the distribution of cultural recovery funds in the latest figures. But a lot of us will be supporting those charities that are considered small scale. On demographics, I don't think there will be many surprises. Men outnumber women trustees 2 to 1. Vast majority, 92%, are white British and aged between 60 to 62, which is 20 years older than the average age in the UK. But actually just 10 years ago, the average age of a trustee in England and Wales was actually 73. So there's been a big move in terms of that particular demographic, and above average in terms of both income and education. In arts and culture, our diversity figures, our response is much more positive than the charity sector as a whole. I've put on this slide, I won't go through it in detail, the latest Arts Council figures in relation to governance, but there's been a huge move, as we all are working to in the arts sector, to increase diversity within our boards, and also a huge push from funders, quite rightly, but so much more to do. But for example, in the arts sector, the gender demographic is quite equal. So women make up 49% of boards, so far higher than is the case in the charity sector. In terms of disqualifications, so who couldn't be a trustee? There's an age disqualification, so you need to be at least 60 to be a trustee of a charitable company or charitable incorporated organisation, unless your governing document says that you need to be older, and 18 to be a trustee of any other type of charity. Other disqualifications might be if you've been disqualified as a company director, you've got certain unspent convictions, for example, involving dishonesty or deception, such as fraud, an undischarged bankrupt, if you've been removed by the Charity Commission as a trustee or for mismanagement, if you have unspent convictions for bribery, terrorism, or money laundering, or are on the sex offenders register. In fact, those last 2 bullet points only came in 2018, so really quite recent. And obviously, if you're working with an organisation that works with children and vulnerable adults, then you may be asked to, or will be asked to, go through enhanced disclosure as well. In terms of our kind of ability to serve, it's a bit of a grey area. The Charity Commission line on it is that we must be considered capable of managing our own affairs if we want to be considered capable of managing a charity, joining as a trustee. But who makes that judgment? I'm not quite clear. So as I say, it's a bit of a grey area. But we can appoint someone who lives outside the UK as a trustee, non-British citizens, people in the UK on temporary visas or seeking asylum, or British citizens who live abroad. And we're all, as trustees, grappling with what diversity means in our context. You know, what should our board look like? Who should be represented? And obviously, as trustees, we're tasked with thinking about the future. So we need to be very aware of what our audiences will be like in 15 years, in 20 years, and our communities, and how we want our board to be able to respond now to those changes. I'm going to very briefly touch on the main legal forms of charities. There are so many trustees I speak to who actually don't know exactly what form they're signed up to. We've got three main types of charity that we might serve with: our charitable company, a trust structure, which is a very simple structure, and the charitable incorporated organisation. And I've just included the main form of social enterprise, of which there is about 60,000 in England and Wales, the community interest company, just to make a point on kind of management of staff. So a charitable company, any of you that have joined charities that were established prior to 2012 are likely to be in a charitable company structure, and you have dual reporting to the Charity Commission and to Companies House. And obviously there are a number of benefits for that structure in terms of being able to claim tax relief on donations made, etc. But it's quite an onerous administrative burden, if you like, to report into two different entities. The trust structure is a very simple structure, usually set up by a legator, somebody who's left some money for distribution as grants. And the work will be carried out by the trustees. They won't enter into contracts, they won't employ staff. So this is our most simple trust structure. For our bigger trusts and foundations, like the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, they do employ staff and they do need to enter into contracts with organisations. So they will be the charitable company structure. In 2012, we got a gift to the charity sector of the charitable incorporated organisation. And it's a gift because it just reports into the Charity Commission. To all intents and purposes, it's very similar to a charitable company. You only wouldn't adopt this structure if you had very complex debt or remortgaging, refinancing requirements. Most charities don't. And so most of the newer established charities are charitable incorporated organisations. The main form of social enterprise, the community interest company, has a different regulator, the Office of the Regulator of Community Interest Companies, which is a bit of a mouthful, located within Companies House. It has an asset lock, so directors can't profit from the profits of that organisation or make personal gain. But the reason I wanted just to highlight it is because if you're a founder of charitable activity, social activity, some may prefer to stick with a community interest company structure because they can serve as directors alongside others and also be paid for the work that they do. In the charity structure, if you're a founder of particular activity, then you become beholden, you become an employee of a charity where the volunteer trustees are effectively your line manager. So they have the say over the strategic direction of the organisation and what happens within your role, etc. So as I say, some founders prefer to be within the community interest company structure because it gives them more control over the future. But of course, as many of you will know, a lot of early stage enterprises go into a charity structure model because they need to, because the funders require them to be a charity to be able to distribute funds. So we're in an imperfect world. None of these structures is perfect for any organization, and we're kind of trying to operate with from the least difficult position when we establish a particular structure. But I'm going to come back to this role of trustees as the line management of executive, because I think sometimes organizations run into difficulties because that isn't readily understood. Charities exist to benefit the public, not specific individuals. So by way of us remembering our key responsibility as trustees, this is the one that we need to come back to. There are three main requirements that we have as trustees, three things to hold in mind. We need to be true to our governing document, so we need to understand it. We need to be thinking all the time about public benefit. Are the activities that we're doing meeting this public benefit requirement, which I'll come back to? And we're also charged with the sustainability of our organization. So those are the three things that are front of mind for trustees, or should be. Of course, if we've got paid staff in the organization, those are not things that they're going to be thinking about on a day-to-day basis. So immediately you've got two sets of kind of obligations, responsibilities, and two sets of people who are going to be thinking about different aspects of the work. In terms of the Charities Act, we've got a wide range of 13 different descriptions of purposes. So we can set up charities for the relief of poverty, advancement of education, where our organizations are in arts, culture, heritage, or science, or this catch-all at the end of any other purposes charitable in law. So the Charity Commission isn't going to stop us setting up an organization that is operating in the same field as another. So we have lots of kind of accusation, I suppose, perhaps quite rightly, of duplication and replication. You know, we have 7 ovarian cancer charities and 8 or 9 prostate cancer charities, all arguably doing very important work, but perhaps not such a good culture of partnership and collaboration. So whilst we're charged as trustees of making sure our organisation survives into the future, that doesn't mean, of course, sustaining it forever and a day. You know, if it has run its course, if it would be better for the activities to be delivered by another organisation, if it would be better to collaborate with another organisation, these are the things that we need to be very hard-nosed about as trustees. These are the decisions that we should be thinking about. So we're not looking to sustain charities forever. If they've run their course, or the purpose would be better served by another organisation, then we need to be taking that very seriously. There was a wonderful charity that was set up by a mother who unfortunately lost her daughter to meningitis. And the key purpose of that charity was to raise awareness of the tumbler test. So if your child has a rash and you put a tumbler on it and it doesn't blanch, then there's a chance it's sepsis and an indication of meningitis. And within the 10 years that that charity operated, public awareness of the tumbler test went to over 70%. So those trustees said, you know, our work's done, this is what we are set up to do, and the assets were distributed to another organisation. We need to have £5,000 running through bank accounts to be registered in the first year as a charity, and we're reporting as our main regulator in England and Wales, as you know, to the Charity Commission. So their priorities are to develop public confidence in the sector, its compliance and accountability, and the self-reliance of individual charities, by which they mean sustainability. So we need to make sure our charities can sustain, or indeed wind them up or merge with another organisation, as I've just already said. The Charity Commission, I think we should view as our critical friend. Often trustees, myself included, can be rather anxious if we run into difficulties as trustees. You know, are we going to be in real trouble or under scrutiny? They are there to support us as our main regulator, and they make, you know, very good information available to trustees, albeit a little dry. But I think in general, you know, if we're unsure, the Charity Commission tends to come into its own when trustees need support or help. Now, the section in bold on this slide is a really key thing for trustees to keep coming back to. So organizations run into difficulties. Charities are no different. There will be times as trustees that our organization runs into some difficulties. The Charity Commission, if they're looking or investigating a particular organization, is not going to make a judgment on whether you as a group of trustees made a good or a bad decision. That's not what their investigative process will be about. They are looking to the process by which you came to that decision. And this is, I think, one of the myths that sometimes we come across in the charity sector. If you have a chair or a treasurer or a vice chair, that somehow they hold more authority for the decision making. Not true. If anything goes wrong in our organization, we are equally responsible as trustees. So we need to be very mindful of this particular section in bold. The Charity Commission is going to be looking for good collective decision making. Really well governed, well managed organizations will have that in place and very effective. The chair's role is to facilitate good decision making, to make sure that everybody can speak, everybody is able to contribute, and that the board, to the best of its abilities, comes to a good collective decision. So really important, I think, that we keep remembering that. The most common mistakes made by trustees, according to the Charity Commission, are a failure to act according to the governing document, failure to manage conflicts of interest, and a failure to oversee fundraising and finance effectively. So all things that could have been avoided with basic information and understanding of trustee roles and responsibilities. Those are the Charity Commission words, not mine. And I do wonder, as our responsibilities get more and more kind of onerous almost as volunteers, whether there will soon come some requirement that trustees have to have some training before they take on these roles. But as we know, that's not the case at the moment. There were over 2,000 or nearly 3,000 serious incident reports in the last reporting period. And in fact, 4,000 or so charities removed from the register. So really quite a high number. Most of the reasons for not filing on time, not being in touch with the Charity Commission, and therefore they would be removed. We're required to record adverse events and submit them to the Charity Commission. And again, this is an area where we need to be quite confident and not worried about judgment. This is a requirement for us. The Charity Commission are going to again be looking at what your solutions are to the issue that has arisen, rather than to be too concerned about what the issue is. So they're looking at process again, and they're looking at the board being collectively charged with managing that particular process. I've just mentioned on this slide a couple of examples. Obviously, we had the very high profile kind of collapse of Kids Company back in 2015, and a very long process in terms of investigation for that organisation. The kind of conclusion was that trustee conduct did not amount to incompetence to a high degree, which I think is a rather extraordinary statement. But we've also had quite a lot of examples in the alternative health sector of difficulties around governance. And now to be able to register one of those charities, there has to be really substantial scientific evidence behind the registration. So that's an area where there's been several examples of investigations into governance. So I wanted to come back to public benefit, because this is one of the three things that we need to be holding on to as trustees. There are two aspects to this rule. The benefit aspect is about whether our purpose is beneficial, should we exist at all as a charity. Our public aspect is about who the purpose benefits. So we need to benefit the public in general, or a sufficient section of the public, and not give rise to more than incidental personal benefit. So we need to be thinking all the time about beneficiaries. I was working with a very successful museum yesterday who have got very high levels of earned income, But because they're so commercially successful, trustees were very aware that they had almost lost sight of this responsibility on public benefit. And so they were trying to turn around their thinking to make sure that they were beneficiary first, rather than kind of building on their successful financial position. Now, we can establish, and some of our organizations represented will be what would be considered niche, working in niche sectors. We can establish charities to work with a very small section of the population, but we've obviously got to have proper reasons for doing so. And we must not exclude poor and low income people from the benefit. And this is one of the areas where arts, culture and heritage organizations can perhaps struggle, especially if the charity status has been secured to be able to drive fundraising. So again, we have to have that and hold that in our heads. And the smaller group of people has to be a sufficient section of the public for the charity's purpose. Back sort of 12 or 13 years ago, when the Sound and Music charity was established to support composing talent, the Charity Commission were rather suspicious about that as a charitable endeavour. But obviously they were able to overcome that very quickly because of their great outreach and community plans and good business planning. But again, we need to just be very kind of aware of this responsibility on public benefit. Most of us will be operating in charity structures that look like this. Some of you will be very small scale, perhaps volunteer led, so it will be rather different. But we have a board of trustees responsible for the line management of paid staff, which may include chief exec, senior management team, heads of teams, other staff, and volunteers. And I come back to this aspect of line management and trustees holding that as a responsibility. I'm working with no less than, I think, 3 different charities at the moment where trustees haven't taken that responsibility. There's been no performance appraisal, no policies in place on grievance, disciplinary, that sort of thing. And for various different reasons, they need to move a chief executive on, or something needs to change, or it could be governance needs to change. And then it's impossible to do so because, quite rightly, those individuals are protected by employment law. So we need proper process, we need good performance management. Trustees need to assume that appraisal process for the chief executive. Now, my next slides in a nutshell are the Charity Commission's areas of compliance, prudence and care. And these are the areas where, when I started as trustee, I really wish somebody had gone through in great detail with me, because I really wasn't aware on some of these financial and legal responsibilities. So it's a kind of great refresher for all trustee boards just to have a recap on these areas. So starting with compliance, we're responsible for the general control and management of the administration of the charity. We usually don't receive any payment for our work. In some cases, if you're a trustee of a major publicly funded museum, you may receive some honorarium for your work, but in general, we don't receive any payment for our work. We need to accept the ultimate responsibility for directing the affairs of the charity and ensuring it's solvent, well run, and delivering the charitable outcomes for the benefit of the public for which it's been set up. So again, you'll notice that phrase, benefit of the public, which keeps coming back in the Charity Commission requirements. I'm going to come back to solvency in just a moment. We need to carry out the charity's purposes for the public benefit, and as individuals act only in the charity's best interest. For other aspects of compliance, we need to comply with charity law, with the requirement of the Charity Commission as regulator, to make sure we prepare reports on what we've achieved, annual returns and accounts as required by law. Filing on time sounds such a kind of arbitrary thing, but many funders, their first point of call will be to go onto the Charity Commission website, to look up a charity's reporting, and if they see that it's late, they will see that as a sign of poor governance and won't fund. So this kind of requirement for on-time reporting is so vital. We mustn't breach any of the requirements or rules set out in our governing document, and remain true to the charity's purpose and objects set out there. Again, if we have joined a board that has a charity that's been set up since 2012, we're using more template documents because that's what the Charity Commission requires. But if you have joined a board of a charity established, some years ago, then the governing document can often be quite peculiar, hard to understand. And certainly for organizations like membership bodies, often the governing documents have been set up or developed to protect the interests of members. So they can be particularly odd sometimes. And we have to make sure as trustees that we understand what's there. We need to comply with the requirements of other legislation and other regulators which govern the activities of the charity, for example, fundraising. And this is an area where I feel quite worried, I think, for trustees, because every time we have a difficulty in governance, then we get more regulation and more legislation. And that falls firmly on our desks as volunteer trustees. And we've already got so much that we're required to support and deliver. So, for example, back in 2015, there was a case of Olive Cook, who was a pensioner who committed suicide, in part because she was being hounded by several charities asking her for money. And that particular incident uncovered all sorts of unscrupulous practice in fundraising, which had to be sorted out and in fact disappeared mostly overnight after the media kind of jumped on it. But we went from a kind of very simple set of requirements for our responsibilities on fundraising to having a new fundraising regulator and a new kind of code of conduct to sign up to. And so it's more and more kind of responsibility that we have as volunteer trustees. And I worry about that because, it's something that I'm not sure is particularly easy when we've already got so much to be able to deal with. But this is the system and structure that we're in. We need to act with integrity, deal with conflicts of interest, and avoid misuse of charity funds or assets. For the duty of prudence, we need to ensure that the charity is and will remain solvent. Now, this is rather a curious one because, I'm sure some of us, some of the organizations I'm working with are in a rather precarious financial position at the moment. This, of course, we can never be in a situation where we might not run into financial difficulties or be sure that we won't, or it would be very unusual if we did. The point of this is that we need to take action if we're concerned. So we can't just bury our heads in the sand and hope that it will go away. We're required to have scenario plans, to have gone through options, to have sought advice, and as a group of trustees to have taken some responsibility for that particular situation. So I've been working with a smallish theatre company that is facing some difficulties. The chair was very concerned because whilst they were airing these difficulties in board meetings, that actually, she felt that the trustees really weren't grasping that this was actually quite a serious situation, and also staff were there. So nobody wanted to alarm the staff unduly. So, board only meeting to properly scenario plan for the options that organisation is going to take. We need to use our funds and assets reasonably and only in furtherance of the charity's objects. Avoid undertaking activities that might place the endowment, funds, assets or reputation at undue risk. Take special care when we're investing the funds of the charity or borrowing funds. And then for the duty of care, this is kind of our role and as individuals, we need to use reasonable care and skill in our work as trustees. So using our personal skills and experience to ensure that the charity is well run and efficient. In my background, originally it was as a fundraiser, so I'm often asked to join boards to support fundraising, which I'm very pleased to do. But obviously I have to make sure that the expectations of the charity is in line with what I'm able to support and the time I'm able to give. And obviously I have to think myself, am I committed to this organization? Am I, invested enough to meet this particular requirement? And then a really important aspect of the duty of care is that we need to get appropriate external advice on all matters where there may be material risk to the charity, land, assets, or large investments are at stake, or where trustees may be in breach of our duties. And again, in terms of our process, this is quite an important one to remember, because it's so important for protecting ourselves as trustees. There will be things that arise where we don't have the skills around the table, where we don't have the knowledge, where we don't have trustees that are able to help. In those situations, we're required to go and get external advice. We would procure it in the way that you would expect. We might write a brief and we would go out to 2 or 3 organizations that could help, and we would select the best brief against the cost requirement. If we don't have assets or money that is readily available to seek advice, then we're still required to go and get that support on a pro bono basis in a reasonable way, which sounds perhaps peculiar, but there are organizations like LawWorks that support charities on a pro bono basis in terms of legal advice. And the Charity Commission want to prevent people saying, well, my mother-in-law is a solicitor, so perhaps, she could help, or that sort of thing. They have actually made a provision for very small organizations to be able to pay trustees now for certain pieces of work, but all trustees have to be agreed that that is in the best interests of the charity, and there needs to be a document in writing that clarifies that. So again, I've been working with a small heritage organization where one of their trustees has supported the fundraising. There's nothing that they're doing that's wrong particularly, but there's nothing in writing and no particular document where all trustees have agreed to that. So they've now had to make sure that that is in place. And then again in 2018, which is a big year for the charity sector, we had some extension to our safeguarding requirements. And this came about from, as some of you may remember, the Oxfam statutory inquiry. Oxfam was very much under the spotlight because there were awful cases of abuse of beneficiaries in overseas territories, but it certainly wasn't just limited to Oxfam. There were many of the sort of international development charities with headquarters in the UK where this applied to. Now, previously, we were required as trustees to provide a safe and trusted environment to vulnerable beneficiaries like children and young people. Now it's a much more extensive requirement. So we are now required to provide a safe and trusted environment to anyone that comes into contact with our charity. So if, for example, you are in a board meeting and you're worried that the chief executive seems to be under undue pressure, that sort of thing, again, we can't bury our head in the sand because we've got a safeguarding requirement for anyone that comes into contact with our charity. Much of the charity sector hasn't caught up with this particular requirement because, in my view, the Charity Commission isn't particularly good at kind of making it public knowledge when there have been huge changes. But we do have this responsibility now. We've got to set an organizational culture that prioritizes safeguarding and have adequate policies, procedures, and measures in place to protect people. We need policies that are agreed by trustees, are regularly updated, and supported by an implementation plan. And the advice also is that we have a lead trustee for safeguarding. But of course, that doesn't mean that that person is wholly responsible, because if anything goes wrong in our charity on safeguarding, we're equally responsible as a group of trustees. Okay, so we can wrap all this up in what's known as the essential trustee. So our 6 main duties, requirements from the Charity Commission: ensure that we're carrying out purposes for public benefit, that we're complying with our governing document and the law, that we're acting in the charity's best interests, we're making sure our charity is accountable, by which they mean financial accountability, filing on time, transparency of financial information. We're managing our resources responsibly, and we're acting as individuals with reasonable care and skill. Another requirement that is a recommendation now is that we should look at our own performance as board members. So we can't say, well, you know, we're volunteers and they're lucky to have us, although I'm sure it feels like that. We're also required to look at how we're performing as a board. One way to do this, which is the most formal way perhaps, is through the Charity Governance Code, which is held by the NCVO as an umbrella body supporting the charity sector. And this looks at trustee performance in 7 different areas in terms of purpose, leadership, integrity, decision-making, risk and control, board effectiveness, equality, diversity and inclusion, and openness and accountability. And there are small charity versions of this, and there are other frameworks indeed. There's a brilliant one called the Charity Excellence Framework, which I really like because it more effectively links strategy, perhaps, with good governance. But I just wanted to pull out some of the recent changes to the codes. Firstly, that there is a requirement that the board looks at its own performance. They're also saying that trustees should serve for a maximum of 9 years. It's advisory, it's guidance, but some bigger funders, for example, the National Lottery Heritage Fund, are looking at some of those things in terms of the decision making around governance on some of their bigger grants. Other things, you know, will be no surprises. Chair and vice chair, they're saying is a very good thing because it can be quite a responsibility to be the chair in terms of time commitment and expectations. So having that counterbalance is something that they are advising is important. And also to look at strategy through the lens of impact. So what impact are we trying to have as trustees? This slide is rather tongue-in-cheek, of course, but we've got to be very mindful of our behaviours as trustees. Certainly in my early days as a trustee, I'm sure people describe me as a seagull. You know, I'd swoop in, make a mess and leave. You know, I'd be like, well, if we just change that in the strategy, then perhaps this would happen, that sort of thing. I quickly learned that wasn't very happy or very helpful. So my kind of equation on effective trusteeship, if you like, is this balance of skills, time, energy, and culture. Most boards recruit to skills. That's fine, as long as it's kind of mindful. I've seen some charities think about the skills they need to deliver the next period of their business plan. That's quite smart from my perspective. You know, you recruit a board of trustees to deliver the next period of your business plan. Because we don't, you know, it's not particularly helpful. Of course, we need good finance skills and legal skills and those sorts of things, but not if it's just a kind of formulaic checklist. We need good time and energy. We can be the most eminent treasurer in the world, but if we're not showing up to meetings or reading papers, we're going to have limited impact. And the bit that's often forgot about is the culture of the board. Different charities need different cultures at different times. Sometimes you'll need your board to be rather driving because you're going through points of change or survival. Other times we need very supportive boards. Organizations that might have gone through a very difficult time need a board that can help them regroup and recover. So I always find that skills, time, energy, culture as quite useful to hold on to. In terms of thinking about good governance, really kind of well-run boards will be clear on their purpose and direction. They will have a good mix of skills, time, energy, and culture. Their policies and procedures will be good enough and proportional to the situation that they're in. What we can't do again, though, is just say, well, we didn't know that we had to have a safeguarding policy. You know, it might be that we can't deliver that or work on it right now, but we should be showing in our minutes that we're working towards it, or that that's something we're going to explore in 6 months' time, that sort of thing. Learning and improving, there's some reflection on where we are, what we're up to. I think we all join boards as trustees and really we're given no historical information at all. So, we could very easily make the same strategic mistakes that have just gone or happened. Anything that we can document as headlines for future trustees, that what's been tried, what's happened, I think is helpful. And then the last two, financially sound and prudent and accountable and transparent, I think go without saying. Again, really well-run boards will have a very effective levels of delegated authority. I've only actually had one very difficult situation in my time as a trustee, and that was when the chief executive was giving the board a much rosier picture of the financial situation of that organisation than was actually the case. There was nothing illegal or fraudulent going on at all. It was more to do with self-confidence. But I vowed at that point that I would never be in that situation again. We really need to understand delegated authority. We need to know what we're paying attention to. So the first point on this, which maybe you'll shake your heads at, some decisions are reserved to the board. There are some things where it's board-only decision-making. Ideally, we should go into meetings being very clear on what we're being asked to make decisions about. Agendas should be structured in that way, because otherwise we can have great conversations at board, but nobody really understands what decisions were made. And an obvious example of this is trustee appointments should be board-only decisions. If we've got a chief executive or equivalent position, of course, we want them to get on with running the day-to-day of the organisation. But the third point, which is where often things go awry, is that we need to have a trust with that individual to escalate high risk or high impact issues for the timely attention and consideration of the board. And this is the bit that is very difficult to manage in our role as volunteer trustees, where we've got the overall responsibility for the strategic direction of the organisation versus paid staff, because we're reliant on our paid staff to give us the information by which to make effective decisions. So we need to decide what we want to know about, when we want to know things, and when that individual is required to escalate particular areas. So you may find that your organisation is incredibly strong artistically, your box office is holding up very well, and in fact, as a board and group of individuals, you really are quite comfortable with that. You don't need to spend lots of time talking about that at board meetings. But the financial situation of your organisation and its overall sustainability is an area that you do need to spend a lot of time scrutinising, talking about within your organisation. So each board will be different, but the board need to take some control of this sort of delegated authority and to really make it work in their particular context. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We're right up to time. So we're going to have a 10-minute break, and we're going to start our breakout bang on 3 o'clock, if that's okay. So look forward to seeing you back here at 3 o'clock. 10 minutes break now. Thanks, everyone. Right, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully that was a good moment just to have some time away from the computer, from the screen. I want to just brief our breakout now. We're going to have 12 minutes or so for you to be able to talk to each other in groups, hopefully put the videos on and be able to meet some fellow trustees. The diagram I'd like you to consider is from a colleague of mine called John Williams at Civil Society, called The 7 Deadly Sins of Boards. For the purposes of the tape, this is a circular diagram that has 7 deadly sins in the middle, and then 7 circles around that, which talk about common problems we find in trustee boards. I'll quickly talk them through. This slide will hopefully be in the chat for you to be able to consider as well. The first is there's no formal board evaluation. We don't look at our own performance as a board. The second is there's no attention to terms of office. So you may find that trustees have stayed a very long time and in fact don't want to be trustees anymore anyway, but feel that they can't leave. There's not enough attention to sustainability and risk. Kind of goes without saying. There's skimping on recruitment is the fourth one. Only 10% of board roles are still even advertised openly, which is why we get accused of cronyism, and that boards are kind of created in the chair's image amongst friends and close networks. There's a lack of engagement by trustees between meetings. Some recruiters will say, well, do join, it's only 4 meetings a year. Of course, that's not true, is it? If we're going to be an effective trustee, there's all sorts of engagement between meetings, papers to read, funding applications to look at, budgets to approve, those sorts of things. There's a lack of respect for SMT, by which I mean senior management team. But you also get this, of course, where the paid staff have no respect for the board either. I did some work with an education charity where the attitude of the team was, well, we'll let the board have their discussion, but we'll just carry on doing exactly what we want to do anyway, which is kind of outrageous. So we sometimes get this lack of respect on both sides. And there's no investment in induction and training. Even for micro charities, trustees need to have some refresher of their responsibilities, some discussion of when things have changed, to be able to consider new areas like safeguarding, as I've already mentioned. So I'd like you to take this as a starting point, and in your groups, just discuss where you've seen some deadly sins or where you've experienced things that are less than helpful, and what could be put in place to improve or help. And I'd like somebody from each group to be able to post 2 or 3 points of summary into the Q&A, and then we will collate this and send it round with the Q&A post session. So hopefully that's clear. You'll now receive a link to join a breakout room, and we'll see you shortly in about 12 minutes or so. Hope it's a good discussion. Wonderful. I hope that was a productive, interesting discussion. If somebody from each group would be kind enough to post your 2 or 3 points into the discussion, we'll collate into the Q&A box. We'll collate them and send them round after the session with the slides. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Vish Roy, who is going to allow her, obviously, to introduce herself, who will do it much better than me. But she holds such an impressive array of arts and cultural trusteeship. She's just going to talk for the next 15 minutes or so until we wrap up. Thanks, Vish.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Michelle. Thank you for having me. I'm hoping to use the next 15 minutes or so to tell you a few things from my own experience of being in different trusteeship roles. I would say my journey started about 15 years ago, and since then I've been part of different types of organizations. I'm going to try and see if I can move my slides. There we go. And through my experience, I'm going to talk to you about 3 different levels, I guess, of what I've learned from these different roles. I'm going to talk about the personal level. That's what I've got from it. I'm going to talk about the organizational level, and then a little bit about the external expectations and things that I've learned about that. And then I have a few best practice processes, things that I feel have helped me in my different roles. So I've called them best practice, but they're not from any published lists or sources. They are drawn from my own experience. And I want to leave you with 5 areas of reflection that I feel as trustees, these are areas that you should probably reflect on from time to time to make sure that you're getting most from the experience, but the organization is as well. So this is some of the organizations that I've been part of. Currently in my role, I'm part of 3 of these now, which is Art in the Park, powered by CAN, and Live and Local. I'm director of an organization called Urban Lamp. So we do research and strategy with creative and cultural organizations. So that gives me, I guess, a broad understanding of how creative and cultural organizations work. I'm also an academic at the University of Warwick, and I primarily teach management and entrepreneurship in creative and cultural sector. So going straight into the personal level then, I think one of the key things at a personal level that I feel I've experienced, but also what has helped me, is knowing my why. Why do I want to be a trustee? Why do I want to be a trustee of a specific organization? And, you know, just understanding really well about what is it that I'm getting into and why I'm doing it. The other area is about getting to know the organization on a personal level. I think it's important, I have found that it's important to understand the organization, but spend some time doing it, and also, you know, evaluating how much I like it and how much there are similarities in values as well with the organization. I think on a personal level as well, I have found that it's quite important to be clear on legal and fiduciary responsibilities. I know that some of those areas have been talked about today, and there's training and other areas of development available to trustees. But on a personal level, those I have found have been quite useful for my own personal growth, but also to help me articulate my why. Just like knowing your responsibility is important, I think knowing limitations has been quite important as well. I've learned through my experience, I think some boards of trustees can have expectations of themselves, but without understanding that they may not have the time or the expertise to do some of the things that they want to do. So knowing your limitations and when to bring in other experts, I think I have found from my experience that that's quite important to know at a personal level. Thinking about the organization then of what they want to get from their trustees, and also what we can kind of contribute to the organizations. I've already said it's important to know the organization, but I think it's important to know the organization's expectations from trustees as well, and because that might be evolving, that might be changing. That's what I found in my experience when I first started to then to the, you know, when I maybe stepped off the board of trustees, what they needed from their board had changed. Understanding the culture of the organization and how you as a trustee can contribute to that culture, how you can sort of bolster it or maybe even make changes within it. I think that's quite good to explore and to know more about. Not just culture, but knowing where the organization has come from, its history, its sort of evolution, and also its values is important to know that as a trustee. And I have found where I have spent time getting to know that I have got more from it, but the organization has got more from me as a trustee as well. There's a bit of a word of warning here as well. I think sometimes getting involved in a lot of detail about the operations of an organization can actually hinder some of your decision making or some of your discussions, objective discussions about an organization. So I think knowledge is good, but actually involvement in detail needs to, there's a word of caution on that, I think. Again, on an organizational level, timing is essential. Sometimes as trustees, you know, decisions can seem, range of decisions can seem equally important, but actually understanding how the organization wants to prioritize the urgency of certain decisions or discussions or contributions from trustees. I think that's quite important to know. I have found through my experience that a good board of trustees can act as an accelerator to help them progress, but equally are a very valuable brick to make them stop and think about what is it that they're doing and why, and if that's the right course of action. So we've talked about personal and organizational. The third level I'd like to talk about is the external, so how you are seen or what you are seen to be doing. I think it's important to be an effective and valuable ambassador for the organization that you're a trustee of. And I think it's also quite important to take a role in changing the perception of the organization. For example, you know, if you are able to influence, you know, the understanding of how approachable an organization is, how innovative they are, or how groundbreaking their work might be, I think it's important as a trustee because we have access to that ambition and information, and we can take a role in sort of getting those messages outside of the organization as well. I have found the more I am able to keep myself abreast of cultural policy and practice, the more you know, important I am, or more useful I am to the board and the organization, because I can input information into the board. So I think it's important to bring that information in to assist with the organization keep on track of what's going on. And this is again from bitter experience. I think if there are things, and this is very possible, if there are things within the organization that you do not agree with, it is important to raise it internally in the right manner, rather than to even allude to it publicly. So I think that we do have that ambassador role as trustees, and I think it's really important to remember that we're quite visible in that role, whether we see it or not. So it's important to, it's only human to not agree with every decision, but it's important to raise that internally before we even show that there might be some kind of disagreement or dissent within the board. So that's 3 levels. And then I wanted to just touch on a few things that I have found, different practices or systems, if you may, that I have found have helped me, you know, integrate better, do my job better as a trustee. So I wanted to flag these up as, I guess, best practice. But as I said, it's not from any kind of published sources. I would say being able to observe a meeting before joining a board has been quite valuable. It helped me, all those things I talked about in terms of values and culture and how decisions are made. You can get a good understanding of that before you start. A lot of cultural organizations offer this idea of board budding schemes, where an old board trustee and somebody who's newly joining can sort of have an informal conversation, or, you know, meet up to talk about the organization. That I found has been quite invaluable. Induction meetings, I think, are very sort of popular and are quite normal for most boards, but induction meetings, I think, specifically at a director level and then with the chair of the board as well, I think are quite valuable. I heard Michelle talking about training and the lack of it, but I think training and board away days, especially training around things like unconscious bias, for example, or diversity, these kind of areas, I think it's important to kind of stay on top of the changing sort of not just regulations, but sort of social perceptions as well. So I would recommend that. Getting to know the organization also includes seeing their work and going to stakeholder events. And I found where I have had an opportunity to do that and have taken up that opportunity, I have been a more valuable member of the board. I think this again comes with a little bit of a word of caution, but if as a trustee you're able to take some part in strategic planning or sort of some part of staff away days, I think having that understanding of those processes and having sort of informal interactions with the staff team has also been quite valuable for me as an active and effective trustee. Just a few more, being part of cultural networks and industry memberships. I have found that that's been quite valuable in being able to contribute more. Staying on top of sort of policies and procedures within, because that also dictates culture, has been quite good, and for me to be able to sort of contribute to the decision making at board level. Obviously, this is not a responsibility of all trustees, specifically the chair, but if as a trustee you're able to take part in annual reviews or appraisals of the CEO or director of the organizations, I found that has been quite valuable as a practice as well. And then lastly, networking, similar to sort of attending shows and stakeholder events, being able to network with stakeholders and funders of the organization, or finding opportunities to do that. I have felt has helped me be a better, a more integrated, a more useful trustee to organizations. And then lastly, I did say I'll leave you with some areas to reflect on, and my recommendation would be to maybe even do this on a yearly basis, a 5-point list of things to think about for each of your trustee roles, which is why do I want to be on this board of trustees? What can they get from me? And what do they need from me, and which of these can I give? How is this role adding to my overall experience, skill set, life? How can I fit in better? And when should I leave, and when should I move on? I'm sure these slides will be made available, but I wanted to leave you with that list because those are the areas of reflection which has helped me understand why I'm on a particular board, what am I doing there, and when I should move on. So that's all I have for you. Be happy to stay on and take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Vish. So we're almost at time. Thank you so much to everyone for attending. If you haven't put your breakout room summary in the Q&A, please do, because then we'll be able to share it with everybody afterwards. If there are any questions from anyone, similarly, pop it into the Q&A and we'll make sure that it's answered with the slides after the session. But thank you for attending. I say we'll be in touch very shortly with follow-up. Have a good afternoon, everybody, and good to see you all. Cheerio.